This is a tough video to make, folks, because if you're a committed fan to this sport, there are rare times when you have a fighter like Volkanovski who's such a great that you connect to, who spends much of their career as the underdog but finds a way to grind themselves to the top. Alex Volkanovski was everything you would want in a great champion. And for me, coming into this one, it was really difficult because there was something different with this one. Like I said in my other videos, there was something in the air. You could feel it. And in the end, the fear and the concern for Volkanovski turned out to be true. So I want to cover two things in this video. The first is going to be talking about this career pattern that so many of the greats end up going through. And then after that, I want to dive into this idea of Volkanovski's comeback, whether I think it's possible, whether he should do it, and what I think it would take for him to ever be successful again. Hopefully you'll want to hear all of that, but as always, I do timestamp everything down in the progress bar. Chael Sonnen has made several videos talking about this, but fighters almost never go out on top. They almost always go out on their back. Because it's very difficult to leave stuff on the table, whether that's legacy or money. The temptation to add one more notch of success often makes you take that one extra step that's off the side of the cliff. Very few fighters are ever actually able to walk away when the time is right. The only one who I think did it perfectly was Georges St. Pierre. And what made him special and unique in that regard was that he was very cerebral. And as good as he was, George had a healthy fear of fighting. George was an amazing competitor, but he didn't let that rule over concerns about his health or his legacy. Unfortunately for many of the greats, though, it's sort of the reverse of that situation, where at first the desire to stack more chips leads them to a place where they lose, and then once they lose, the desire to get it back takes precedence over everything else. And in the end, it often leads to a vicious spiral downward. You can look at vintage greats like Mark Coleman and Don Frye, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, Anderson Silva. Virtually all of them experienced that bell curve career trajectory. And at this point, it looks like Alex Volkanovski is another one to add to that list, unfortunately. But the ultimate question now is, can he get it back? Can he rise back to the top? And the universal answer to that question is that somebody will defy these odds. Somebody will have a fall and then rise back to the top. It's only a matter of time until that happens. Whether that's Alex Volkanovski remains to be seen, but it will happen. Just as at some point somebody who's over 35 years old will win a championship at the lighter weight classes. It will happen. Whether it's 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years, mark my words. And if there is one person in the modern era who's capable of doing it, it's probably Volkanovski because he does have such a strong mindset. I was impressed with him at the post-fight press conference. He kept it together very well. He was very humble, and he seemed very motivated to try to get it back. But we have to be realistic here. The desire to do something and the ability to do it are two totally different things. So if you want to turn what seems like the impossible into the possible, you have to go back to the drawing board and rebuild everything from the ground up. The two problems that I see now for Volkanovski is that number one, he's fragile, and all of his competition going forward is going to believe that. And number two, he does not have a great defensive style. Volk has gotten hit many times in his fights over the years. He's been in a lot of wars. He's taken a lot of damage. And even though according to him, he only got concussed one time, it looks at this point as if the chin is gone. I remember seeing this same exact thing happen to Chuck Liddell. And if you weren't a fan during the era of Chuck, he used to be in wars and he would take so much damage and so much punishment and eat it like it was nothing. But at the end of his career, you could knock him out by smacking him with a feather. Now, to be as fair as possible to Volk, he did take a very hard shot from Ilya, and that punch probably would have put most people out. But if Volk had had an optimal defense game, he wouldn't have taken that punch. Volk has very sloppy defense when he's on his back foot. He not only leaves his chin exposed, but he often sticks it up in the air. The game plan for him should have never been to try to engage in a tight battle, especially with his back on the fence. The strategy for him should have been that if he gets on the fence in a tight battle like that he keeps a tight, high guard around his head and works his way back to the center of the cage. At the very start of the exchange that ended it, Volk was sliding rightward on the fence and he had his arms up in sort of a flailing defensive posture, and Ilya's punches were deflected in that moment, but then Volkanovski sort of stopped hard like he wanted to engage in the fight, and that's when he got caught, when what he should have done was kept the guard high and slid himself along the fence until he could move out back to the center. So here's the hard reality for Volk going forward. You can't have a fragile chin and sloppy defense. He is good enough to beat anyone in almost every single aspect of the game, but his kryptonite is going to be the tight firefight situations. So if Volkanovski wants to rise back to the top, which he possibly could do, he's going to have to completely transform his defensive game. He already has the offensive tools to win any fight. So while he should make sure that those are always kept polished, the vast majority of his training camps going forward should be becoming as defensive as possible and unhittable as possible. I think the time has come for Volk to take a more Robert Whittaker-style approach to winning fights. Forget about going out there and trying to finish guys. Forget about being in wars, and go out to dominate on points, much in the way that a guy like George St. Pierre used to do it back in the day. Again, if you weren't a fan during the era of George St. Pierre, it could be argued that George had a somewhat fragile chin, and after his first fight with Matt Serra, when that was exposed, George went back to the drawing board and became incredibly defensively sound. And for the rest of his career, he never lost a fight, and while he did take some shots here and there, they were never hard shots. So if Volkanovski ever wants to have gold around his waist again, he's going to have a style like this going forward, and as I've said, that's just the hard reality. So that's going to be it for this breakdown and analysis. Please let me know down in the comments, what are your thoughts about this situation? Can you imagine any scenario where Volk can come back from this? And what improvements do you think he needs to make in order to make that possible? I will look forward to reading your thoughts, and as always, I appreciate you being here. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel for more in the future. Thanks and have a great one.